Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ryan, and welcome to Central Park. We know that it can still be pretty difficult getting to Central Park, so we want to continue to help bring the park to you by offering in-person tours as well as virtual tours, including longer 45-minute programs, as well as our shorter, informal 15-minute weekly walks. Thank you for joining us today for a weekly walk of the Mall and Literary Walk with me, Ryan, on March 23rd, 2022. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us and supporting us here at the Central Park Conservancy. You may be familiar with us. We're the nonprofit caretakers of Central Park that have been caring for Central Park's beautiful landscapes, statues, and history since about 1980. Our mission is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. Now, as we take a little 15-minute weekly walk today, making our way through the park and ending at a location, the Mall and Literary Walk, I want to remind you that we're using Zoom. So if you do want to say hello or let us know a favorite feature of the park you might have, please let us know through the chat feature. If you do have a question, please use the Q&A feature, and my colleagues Emily and Jose are going to be on the back end answering any questions you might have. Last thing you'll see pop up throughout the tour today, I'll launch one visitor poll throughout the walk, and once everybody has voted in that, I can share the results and we can see what everybody's thinking. Now, without any further ado, let's jump into our weekly walk today, where we're going to be walking to the Mall and Literary Walk, an area we're probably familiar with as we visited it quite a few times before. As we do make our way through the park today, though, I want to really keep a special theme in mind, and that's really the theme of authors and poets, because just a few days ago on Monday, March 21st, was World Poets Day. So on our walk today, we're going to highlight some of these areas that have a few interesting little poets available in them, as well as some fun little stories that I like to share as we make our way through the park. So as we begin, we're going to start down near Grand Army Plaza at 59th and 5th Avenue as we make our walk through the park celebrating World Poets Day. As we start our walk here in Grand Army Plaza, we're going to start in the southern section of the plaza, which is an area that maybe not too many people visit. Over here, we'll see a beautiful fountain and statue, this being the Pulitzer fountain, and actually would come around 1916, coming from the creation of Thomas Hastings, Carl Bitter, and Isidore Conti, who together would create this beautiful fountain, as well as the statue of Pomona we see just atop the fountain. This beautiful area certainly has a lot of great views, although no water flowing just yet. We can expect the water to come back on soon, as the pipes, of course, do get shut off during the winter time, but we've just made it to springtime, so we can expect to see the water flowing soon. This fountain would actually help to honor Joseph Pulitzer, who would leave money in his will to help create this memorial fountain. Joseph Pulitzer, that name might sound familiar. He was an American politician and a newspaper articulist for a while, creating quite a few different pieces, including the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, as well as the New York World, which was one of the more famous newspaper publications here in New York. We would see this fountain coming after his passing, helping to carry on his legacy. And we, of course, see his legacy and his name scattered around a lot, as we might be familiar with the Pulitzer Prizes, which would be started around 1917 and would actually come because of donations and endowments he would give to Columbia University. But of course, we have this beautiful fountain, which we can see a lot of interesting symbolism all around. You might notice the features along this fountain. One of my favorites are actually this little turtle, which we can see here in the base, which typically is shooting water into this little kind of petal type basket. But what we see here are a lot of these kind of horn or sort of cornucopia type shapes. They might look familiar, remind you of those cornucopias that you typically see around Thanksgiving time. This design is really representative, or cornucopias really in general, are representative of a symbol of plenty, really consisting of a goat's horn typically, which is where we see that kind of shape coming from, and typically overflowing with flowers, fruits, and corn. But cornucopia really is just a sign of plentiful things to come. And it's very fitting for this statue, which features Pomona up top. Pomona being the Greek goddess of abundance and health. And you might notice that she is holding a basket that happens to be overflowing with different types of fruits and flowers, much like the cornucopias we see decorating the base of this fountain. Also notice in this photo, which is coming from Sarah Cedar Miller, one of our Central Park Conservancy colleagues, that Pomona has a little colleague joining her on her shoulder up there, a little temporary visitor with that New York City pigeon. As we make our way around, we can enjoy this fountain for what it'll look like in a few weeks or maybe a month or so, once the water is flowing and we start to get the spring blooms of those beautiful Tallery pear trees behind the fountain. We can look forward to this view, which will be coming soon. As we make our way away from Pulitzer Fountain now, we can start to make our way into the park. And one last thing I always find interesting about this area is it's really scholarly type of representation, which makes sense because this is actually Scholars Gate. And beyond having the Pulitzer Fountain, which is of course coming from Joseph Pulitzer, that newspaper magnate, we also see a lot of interesting stories occurring down here, both stories that are written about as well as ones that we can read just from books, like some of these Strand bookstores, which have books available right here down near Scholars Gate. These bookstores open typically most days throughout the summer months and allow us to get various types of new, used, and rare books. So if you ever forget your book on your way to Central Park, you can stop by this section and potentially get one to read for your next journey in the park. As we do make our way now past Scholars Gate, we can start to enter the park and get away from some of those automobiles and start to see some more of the naturalistic landscapes of Central Park. As we make our way into this area, entering near the pond, right around 59th Street, we can come down a path we rarely come down and enjoy some of the artistic beauty that exists within the park. And very fitting, we have this sign which reads, "My artistic ideas come from quiet reflection in Central Park." And I think that's very fitting as we walk around the park today, celebrating World Poets Day, because what better place to get inspired than nature? And coming into Central Park, whether it was in the 19th, 20th, or presently 21st centuries, it's very easy to get inspiration from these beautiful landscapes. As we start making our way down into the park, we can see a statue that we seldom get to visit, but very appropriate to visit today. The statue we come up to is none other than a poet. It's actually a poet that sits down here in this section that is sometimes called Poets' Corner of Central Park. Coming up to Poets' Corner, we can see Thomas Moore. Thomas Moore being an Irish poet, this piece being sculpted actually by an Irish sculptor as well, Dennis Sheehan. We see many of these different early gifts like this one, which would come in 1880 rather, being donated by various different types of citizen groups. And we see this one actually being commissioned by the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick. Of course, an Irish group looking to represent Irish culture here in Central Park and this ever-growing New York City. And we see Thomas Moore getting a very beautiful view sitting down near the pond around 59th Street, getting a wonderful look over this landscape. And very fitting because this landscape, prior to becoming Central Park, actually housed a small community of Irish citizens that would get the name Pigtown because there were pig farms nearby here. In fact, pigs were actually very common throughout much of New York. And before Central Park and before the city got cleaned up, feral pigs and dogs did run around the streets. Of course, a lot has changed today as we don't have anybody currently living in Central Park, and we luckily don't have any feral pigs and dogs running around, but rather have traded that for a lot of beautiful naturalistic landscapes, much like the one Thomas Moore gets to overlook from his pedestal. As we start to make our way north from Thomas Moore, we can head right around the pond, enjoying the beauty of this landscape and some of the different perennial plants that are popping up. Crocus are going to be a genius of about 100 different perennial flowers that you can see popping up all throughout New York and especially present right now in Central Park during this first week of spring. Some absolutely beautiful colors ranging from yellows to reds, the purples we see here. As we make our way down, we can enjoy other beautiful blooms that are coming, like the constant evergreen shrubs, as well as some of the red maples we're seeing on our left-hand side over here. And as we pass by even further, we of course are seeing a lot of yellow from those beautiful cornelian cherry dogwoods. Cornelian cherry dogwoods, as well as forsythia, and even some witch hazel are coming into bloom now, adding a bunch of different shades of yellow to our enjoyment of the park. As we make our way a little bit west now, crossing over the Gapstow Bridge, we can come to another interesting landscape, one we don't often get to visit on our weekly walks, but one that I wanted to bring us to because as we saw that sign, again, I keep thinking about inspiration coming from the park. And I'm not much of a poet or writer, but I certainly love occasionally reading in the park, getting outside, and just becoming inspired. So I thought I'd take us to a very inspirational spot in the park. As we climb up these Manhattan schist steps, we can walk up to Copcot, one of the most magnificent rustic structures you'll find in Central Park today. Copcot, actually, it's very fitting that we're visiting it since we are coming in again on Poets Day, areas that have a lot of inspiration, as well as seeing some of these different types of cultures. And we are seeing Copcot actually being really representative of more of a Scottish phrase. It's loosely translated to little cottage on the crest of the hill, really relating to its position on this little rocky outcrop here near Central Park South. This structure was an original one created in the park, but of course, like many of the wooden structures, it was lost over time. We would see this being recreated by the Conservancy around around 1984. And during that recreation, of course, bringing one of our favorite structures back to the park, allowing people to rest and get some shade during the summer months, as it typically is filled with wisteria and other viney plants that offer a beautiful rest spot. But during these spring months, of course, we don't mind getting hit with excess sun. And if anything, we actually prefer to be out in the sun and outside of Copcot. It does look still pretty even without the green leaves, but I think the best area to enjoy during this season is going to be on the rocks, hillsides, and the benches just outside of Copcot. These little surrounding landscapes are one of my favorite. And looking up towards Copcot, we can see why. Just lush green, beautiful types of evergreen plants here, and really inspiring views as we see Copcot just sticking right out between those eastern white pine trees. We'll also notice something else pretty interesting over here, a little inspiring. Noticing these palm tree looking type of plants. These palm tree looking plants are going to be a type of yucca. Y-U-C-C-A. Yucca plants are another genus of really a bunch of different types of perennial shrubs and trees. Of course, very representative of a palm tree, certainly what it makes me think of transporting me to South America, to a warmer area. And the reason we might have these plants, which are not native and actually typically found in South America and the Caribbean, is because of the location we're nearby. Just along 59th Street and 6th Avenue, we'll find these three statues of South American heroes. These South American figures are right nearby 6th Avenue, which happens to be Avenue of the Americas, getting that name in 1945 by Mayor Figueroa LaGuardia. We see some of these statues being relocated to this area to help again create a little bit more of a theme representing some of our friends in the South. But really amazing statues and artwork here, as well as beautiful different types of plants and flora. Be careful though when you're enjoying some of these plants because they are quite sharp, and I pricked myself just by tapping into one of them. I guess that's appropriate though, because a nickname for this plant is the Spanish dagger. Very appropriate because the end of those palm fronds are very sharp. So be careful as you're enjoying these beautiful yucca plants. As we make our way north now, we're going to head to really our main stop for the tour today. Since we're again celebrating World Poets Day, we have to stop by Literary Walk and the Mall. But we're going to make our way up north now. And as we start to make our way up north, we've only really seen one poet so far. But as we start making our way to the mall, I would like to launch a poll I have for the walk today, which is, do you have a favorite poet with a statue here in Central Park? I think I have just about all the poets on here. I did exclude other authors like Hans Christian Andersen and really tried to leave people that are primarily poets on there. So I'll leave that up for us to vote on as we make our way to our final few stops on our little weekly walk today. As we cross the street entering the mall, we will come onto an area I'm sure we're quite familiar with, one that constantly looks beautiful throughout the season and one that offers a lot of interesting history. As we make our way up here, we can enjoy some of the poets that exist in Literary Walk, as well as one writer who kind of is included here in Literary Walk, Christopher Columbus, who also, of course, has another statue, Columbus Circle. But since we're focusing on poets today, we can slide up and check out Robert Burns, which was an early statue addition here in the mall area. We'd see Robert Burns coming around 1880, and he is going to be a Scottish author and poet, writing quite a few pieces that may not be extremely memorable today, but I'm sure if you were to see some of the lines or names, you might have a little bit of a remembrance of them. But an interesting character, and one that of course represents some of the early culture and early immigration that was coming into New York. What we see here is a poet that was part of the Romantic era, and we could see some interesting decoration along the statue. But one of the things that always stick out most to me is, again, the natural aspects of these pieces. Being a romantic style poet and writer, typically that meant you were connecting with nature and often going outside and writing in nature. We see some appropriate decoration on this statue. You might notice what Robert Burns is sitting on. It's a tree stump. Doesn't it look quite similar to the elm bark that we can see just in the background? I love seeing how life imitates art, or art imitates life. But we have really some amazing representation and great connection to the park here, just based on the tree stump that Robert Burns is sitting on. As we jump across from Robert Burns, we can see Sir Walter Scott. Sir Walter Scott, you might have guessed from his last name, another Scottish character. He would actually come a little bit before Robert Burns, being erected around 1872. And both of these pieces being sculpted by John Steele, a Scottish sculptor. But really interesting pieces that we can see here, having a similar romantic style and theme to Burns. We can see a couple natural elements. My favorite being the Scottish Deerhound, which sits just next to him. Everybody that has come on a tour with me knows I'm a big dog fan. And this area of the park happens to be one where all three dog statues are right next to each other. A little bit to the east, Balto, we have this Scottish Deerhound with Sir Walter Scott. And then a little bit to the west from here, we're going to have the Indian Hunter, which features a dog. But beyond that, we can see a different type of natural element here. Much like Robert Burns sitting on that tree stump, we can see Sir Walter Scott sitting on a rock. And doesn't that look awfully similar to the bedrock of Manhattan, the Manhattan schists that we can see just in the background and all throughout the park? These type of connections help to really merge that artistic view with this beautiful naturalistic landscape. And I find them so fitting and so connecting. As we make our way a little bit past Walter Scott, I want to take us up to the only American to have a statue here in Central, in Literary Walk, in this portion of the mall, which is Fitzgreen Halleck. Doesn't ring a bell? Really? Well, that's not a surprise. Not too many people know who Fitzgreen Halleck is today. He was extremely popular during his time. He would write quite a few papers, such as the Croker papers, early satirical work that was really ahead of its time, but a really interesting character, and one that caught the attention of a lot of people, actually said to have been one of Abraham Lincoln's favorite poets. But we can see this statue, which would come around about 1877. And when this statue was unveiled, we can see a little sketch of the unveiling ceremony here. We would see tremendous amounts of people, thousands upon thousands of people coming to see the dedication of this statue, which was unveiled by President Rutherford B. Hayes. Today, I don't think I've met anybody who really knows who Fitzgreen Halleck is, or has really much popularity like he did back in the 19th century. This is a great example as to why the designers of Central Park, Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted, didn't really want statues in the park and saw them as intrusions, especially when they're characters and specific people. We tend to see sometimes that popularity and that remembrance fading a little bit, and we're left with a statue of a seemingly unknown character. However, of course, these statues do play a part of history, and of course, we can remember how important they were when they came up. But today, of course, we don't see too many people lining up to take pictures with Fitzgreen Halleck. As we make our way a little south now, we can head to our final statue to view on our walk today. One I'm sure we're very familiar with, and one I'm sure we've seen a few times, but of course, one that always has a lasting effect in America. we're coming up to none other than William Shakespeare. And of course, William Shakespeare's really remembrance and long-lasting effect on America certainly touches pretty much all schools and even almost all facets of Central Park, as we can find a few different Shakespeare relations throughout the park, including the Delacorte Theater, where Shakespeare in the Park performances occur, as well as two other Shakespeare-themed statues, The Tempest and Romeo and Juliet. Of course, another landscape you might be able to visit that has amazing Shakespeare reference is going to be the Shakespeare Garden. And since we're celebrating World Poets Day, I thought I'd transport us really briefly to Shakespeare Garden to read one Shakespeare quote that can be found on a plaque throughout there. There can actually be about 16 total plaques found throughout this garden that have Shakespeare quotes, but I wanted to share a favorite of mine from one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, A Midsummer Night's Dream. I know a bank whereon the wild thyme blows, where oxlips and the nodding violet grows, quite over canopied with lush woodbine, with sweet musk roses, and with elegant thyme. Certainly a very fitting read for our World Poets Day as we celebrate this lovely little holiday and some of the lovely little poets themed statues throughout the park. As we make our way back, I'd like to share one other interesting site you might occasionally find near Shakespeare. While you might not find plaques like those in Shakespeare Garden near this statue, you will occasionally find people doing the tango, because right near the Shakespeare statue, actually at the Shakespeare statue, which is the meeting point, you can find throughout summer months many different tango meetings. The Central Park Tango Club will meet here and offer free tango lessons and a free tango dance-off. It's really amazing the tremendous amounts of people that show up for this. And this photo coming from Mark Halleritz from the New York Times gives us a small view of just a few of the people here. But if you are to come during the summer, typically these events occurring from, I believe, about May or June throughout the first Saturday of, I think, June, throughout the Saturdays throughout the summer, you can find these tango groups forming here. And if you don't know how to tango, certainly stop by and there'll be plenty of people that'll teach you. But you can enjoy the wonderful music as you dance underneath the beautiful elm trees of the mall, getting views of this wonderful landscape. And of course, whether you're stopping in the park to maybe write a poem or maybe to do dancing, there's always endless fun and inspiration to find. As we do come to the end of our walk, I want to share the results. And of course, William Shakespeare is a favorite of everybody's poets here in the park. But maybe you learned about a poet you hadn't known existed, like Friedrich Schiller, who's a German poet, the first statue to be placed in the park as well, on the north end of the mall. Or maybe you just learned about Fitzgreen Halleck, or even Thomas More, who doesn't get too much visitation. But as we make our way to the end, I want to thank you again for joining us. Remind you that, again, coming into Central Park, there's always an area to find an inspirational view, especially as we sit here on the Mall and Literary Walk underneath some of these very inspirational poets and authors and people that have certainly left a lasting impact on Central Park today. I want to thank you again for your support in joining us for these weekly walks. And I want to remind you that, again, we of course have plenty of ways to stay involved, whether you want to watch old recorded weekly walks on our YouTube channel or get out there and walk these weekly walk routes yourself. We of course have plenty of other ways to stay involved, whether it be in-person tours or virtual programs. And I do want to remind you of some of the special programs we have coming up, ones that typically aren't offered year long, but ones that are only going to be around for the next month or so, like our Hidden History Women in Central Park tour. We will have a virtual tour of that tomorrow at 2 p.m., as well as a handful of different in-person tours throughout the end of March and throughout May. So I do want to encourage you to check into tours like this, as well as other programs which can be found out on our website. If you do check in the chat boxes, my colleagues will drop some links for some of the upcoming programs we have to make it a little bit easier for you. But again, thank you so much for joining us and supporting us here at the park. We absolutely love doing these walks and we love having you join us for them. We'd like to remind you that the park does need us and we of course need the park. So what is it about Central Park that you need the most? We'd love to hear from you using the hashtag #TheParkNeedsUs, and we'll feature it on our social media channels. I am going to keep this chat room open for a little bit longer, just in case anybody has any last minute questions. And I hope to see you in the future for more lovely walks. Please be sure to join us for next week's weekly walk, as my colleague Emily will be leading her first weekly walk. So we'll all show her some support next week. And again, we look forward to seeing you on other future programs, both virtual and hopefully in person. So thank you so much for joining us. And from all of us here at the Central Park Conservancy, stay safe, be well, and we'll see you soon.